You're walking through an unfamiliar sunset when a cloud shifts just enough to let the sunlight spill all over the horizon. You're stuck between calling it lilac or maybe jade, only it's neither each and somehow everything in between. Words build nations. They diagnose illnesses, swipe right on romance, sign peace and start wars, but every sentence is also a compression algorithm, because to fit the whole world into your mouth, most of it must end up on the cutting room floor. You'd know this if you've tasted flavors in food you couldn't put a word to, or struggled to convince your friend the terror of your nightmares, or sent a message and felt the phrase sag under the weight of what you really meant. You have brushed against the boundary between language and raw experience. So while we use words to cut away at raw experience until only something discrete and communicable is left, it's important to look inside the compression machine and recognize where exactly these cuts occur. But first, quick, tell me what colors you see in this chart. Yes, green. What else? Anything else? Well, if you grew up speaking Himba in Namibia, you'd easily spot two distinct colors here. All this and this. Now, researchers showed that the Himbas can distinguish this shade as the odd one out much faster than Westerners can, and it's quite likely because the Himba tribe has distinct names for multiple shades of green. Simply having separate words in their vocabulary for different shades of one color enhances their ability to spot them and tell them apart in the real world. The brain brings those differences to attention more quickly. To further prove this, the researchers did the opposite experiment. Now, what's the odd color out here? Your eyes probably jump straight to the blue square, but Himba people take much longer to spot the blue as the odd color out, because blue, for them, is grouped with several other colors under the same name. Psycholinguists call this the linguistic relativity effect, the idea that the labels that we inherit shape how our brains chunk raw sensation. It's almost as if the mental vocabulary you possess shapes the vividness of what grabs your attention in a given scene. So wouldn't you then wonder about your own mental vocabulary, your personal map of words which form your map of thoughts, and how this influences what you notice more vividly compared to someone else? If this sounds familiar, psychotherapists capitalize on reframing your mental vocabulary with the hope that it trickles down into shifting the vividness of certain undesirable felt experiences that you may have. Words don't just describe your reality, they might even help create your version of it. Now, if language shapes our perception like this, what else might it be distorting? What's the bigger picture here? What a clean street on Google Maps, but looking at the real street, however, we notice a fat trash bag ruptured in the gutter, graffiti on the boardwalk, and a faint smell of donuts. All aspects your map refuses to name. Now, this sounds really fucking obvious, but it's quite a classic trait for us people to misunderstand reality by confusing symbols with the things they're meant to represent. The map, words, diagrams, beliefs, frameworks is not the territory, the messy, complex, dynamic reality actually out there. This becomes a miniature map, a compressed interpretation made with standardized words based on observed behaviors filtered through your own map of reality. The territory, however, is a human, a life, a history, contradictions, neurobiology, and everything else this phrase might miss. So while living in a world of abstractions, symbols, money, words, labels, apparently there must be an evolutionary advantage to feeling as if these maps we have are real. I mean, what feels real becomes easier to spread, but in reflecting reality, maps are not always truthful, because when we risk conflating the two, we become blind to nuance, vulnerable to dogma, and risk harming ourselves or others in the name of a map detached from the territory. You see, maps don't necessarily care for reality, they will grow for the sake of their own survival, and your head may be the perfect host. And for what you get in return may be your sanity. A personal map is comforting. It grounds us in a shared reality, and the comfort you receive from your internal map makes it something to defend. The truth, however, the raw essence of actual territory, therefore, may become, as Bertrand Russell puts it, a secondary consideration. Because of this, in therapy, philosophy, politics, and relationships, we tend to risk forcing people or ideas to fit the maps we've inherited, instead of opening ourselves to what the territory is actually showing us. A map is not its territory, the word is not its thing, this is not love, and this famous painting by René Magritte showing what appears to be a pipe states right beneath it in French, reminding the audience that this is not a pipe. But all of this is just speech-based language, speech-based maps. Could there be an even bigger picture here? Well, how about we look into the most fundamental language we have, maths. And this is where things get a little trippy. In the early 1900s, Kurt Gödel felt something off about mathematics. The general sentiment at the time was that math would eventually describe everything there is to know. But something didn't feel right about that claim. The vibes were off. Now, Gödel initially didn't know how to express these off vibes using math itself, so to explore this hunch, he dug into a form of philosophy called logic that dealt with odd statements like this one. From this different perspective, he could finally identify what felt wrong all along, and what he brought back to mathematics ripped the rug from under everyone's feet. Gödel discovered that in any formal system powerful enough to express arithmetic, there will always be truths that are true, but unprovable within the system's own rules. In other words, no matter how comprehensive your language is, even maths, it is in the nature of language itself to always leave something out. You can describe the physics of light waves, explain retinal cones, even outline the neural correlates of vision, but you still can't explain what the color red feels like to someone who's never seen it. Gödel showed that mathematics too has its version of red, statements that are clearly, undeniably true, yet unprovable from within the mathematical system. Now imagine a perfect mirror that can reflect an entire room, except for its own glass. To truly understand the room, you need to understand the mirror too. But the mirror itself is your only medium to understanding the room, and if you can't use the medium to fully see itself, how are you to know what you really are? Really, could the full understanding of what you are also be unattainable via your own conscious experience? Our knowledge in this case might be seen as us walking upwards a flight of steps, with the constant feeling of making progress towards our full understanding, only for us to be seen chasing our tail by some other being in a higher dimension. Escher's art style followed this idea visually. Bach expressed it musically, and Douglas Hofstadter explored beautifully in his book Gödel, Escher, Bach. I haven't read it, but shit's a banger apparently. Will we ever know how doomed we are to never know? Just as Gödel had to step outside mathematics into philosophy to express what couldn't be thought within the system he critiqued, when we humans hit the edge of a system, you can freeze, yes, or you can run sideways. Take James Joyce, for example. After a lifetime of writing prose, fed up with traditional language, Joyce melted the English map down into a kind of dream fluid in his critically acclaimed and notoriously difficult book, Finnegan's Wake. He doesn't just describe someone's fall like thunder. Dude writes thunder straight into your chest.
Bababadal harach ta coming aron con bron ton aron twan thun trovar hunon scan tu huur denen thurn nook.
Bypassing grammar completely, slamming meaning directly into sensation. Now step back into a shamanic ceremony in the upper Amazon. The participant drinks ayahuasca and begins their descent. What language could a shaman possibly use to guide someone through the spiritual and chaotic unraveling of their own maps of meaning? The shaman does so not through instructions or any conventional language, but through INQUIRES, melodies woven from breath, bird song, and syllables no outsider can translate. It seems that shamans early on realized that in taking on the role of spiritual guide, INQUIRES were more effective at communicating than the discrete blocks of processed reality like words, which may have dissolved entirely for the participant. INQUIRES translate raw sensation through resonance and energy rather than semantic clarity, and it's through these INQUIRES, not words, that the participant is comforted and guided. Now, this phenomenon isn't confined to the jungle. Charismatic Christians in Pentecostal churches speak in tongues, glossolalia. Spontaneous syllables with no real formal meaning, yet deeply charged with spiritual emotion. Programmers invent new languages when existing code can't express the complexity of a task adequately. Even rappers mumble.
I've never written a lyric, ever.
Bending words so that tone and rhythm can carry energy that syntax would otherwise flatten. Somehow, what can't be clearly said in words may still get heard. Humans are relentlessly creative in this way, and you are a human too. When one modality stops working, you shape another one. So maybe the question isn't just how do we say what we mean, but rather what do we turn to when saying stops working? What happens in the cracks between words and experience, and how do we say a sentence that can't exist? First, Gödel might say, hold your maps lightly. His hunch about mathematics led him to step outside his mathematical map and into philosophy and logic. And in doing so, he revolutionized mathematics. When you strongly suspect a major problem in something you care deeply about, consider how the structure of that system, the map itself, might be part of the problem. In those moments, it's not just okay, it's often the right thing to set aside your own map, even briefly, and venture into someone else's. To understand the problem with the room, it's like becoming the ceiling, so you might finally see the crack in the mirror you've been using to look through all along. Second, trade certainty for curiosity. Wisdom is the fine balance between communicating your internal map with conviction whilst also staying vigilant in not having the full picture yourself. Ask yourself what's got cropped out before the animal in you bares its teeth to protect its reality. Gödel showed us the map is always incomplete, and good. Let conversations be reconnaissance, not prosecution. A good question will always take you further than claims. And when the differences in your maps collide, find a way to let go and walk through the actual terrain together. Third, let language be plural. Show as well as tell, sketch, hum, pause, gesture, talk with your eyes and listen with your mouths. Where words won't heal, presence or touch might make the difference. And where numbers and logic leave us questioning what it all means, clarity of mind can even briefly make it all make sense. And where words aren't necessary, allow yourself silence. Let your experience of reality breathe without having it warped into your comprehension.